In the 8th century BCE, Egypt is still famous, still monumental, still heavy with memory, but it is no longer whole. From a distance, the temples stand, the Nile still floods, priests still perform rituals older than most civilizations. But beneath that surface continuity, the state that once projected power from Nubia to the Euphrates has fractured into competing centers that no longer obey a single command. Egypt is no longer an empire. It is a collection of rival authorities sharing a past they can no longer control. This collapse does not arrive suddenly. It unfolds over generations. The end of the New Kingdom leaves Egypt without a durable mechanism for succession or centralized military command. Royal authority weakens, power shifts away from the throne and into regional hands. In the north, rulers of Libyan descent control portions of the delta, governing through local alliances rather than imperial bureaucracy. In the south, the priesthood of Amun at Thebes becomes a parallel power structure, commanding loyalty, wealth, and armed followers independent of any pharaoh. Egypt does not break in two. It fragments into many. By the early 8th century BCE, there is no unified Egyptian army capable of responding to a large external threat. Military forces exist, but they are regional, raised by local rulers, loyal to local interests, and rarely coordinated. Command structures overlap and conflict. Legitimacy is contested not just politically, but religiously. Different rulers claim divine favor. None can enforce it across the entire Nile Valley. If you watch this all the way through, what becomes clear is that Egypt is not conquered in the traditional sense. It is overtaken because it can no longer act as a single state. This vulnerability is visible in how Egypt governs territory. Lower Egypt, particularly the Delta, is divided among multiple dynasts who rule through family ties and mercenary forces rather than national institutions. These rulers compete with one another as much as they resist outsiders. Their authority depends on negotiation, not command. When pressure appears from beyond Egypt's borders, they lack the unity to respond collectively. Upper Egypt is no more centralized. The Theban region is dominated by the powerful priesthood of Amun, whose control over temples, land, and armed retainers gives it enormous influence. In practice, Thebes functions as a semi-independent state within Egypt, one whose priorities do not always align with those of northern rulers. Loyalty flows toward the god and his priests as much as toward any king. This division undermines Egypt's greatest historical strength, coordination along the Nile. In earlier periods, control of the river allowed rapid movement of troops, supplies, and authority. In the 8th century BCE, the same river now marks boundaries between competing powers. Armies raised in one region cannot assume cooperation downstream. Fortified cities answer to different rulers. Communication slows. Response times lengthen. Externally, this weakness does not go unnoticed. To the south lies Kingdom of Kush, centered around Napata and deeply familiar with Egyptian politics, religion, and warfare. Kush is not a newcomer observing Egypt from afar. It has traded with Egypt, fought Egypt, been ruled by Egypt, and ruled itself in Egypt's shadow for centuries. Its elites worship Amun. Its kings understand pharaonic ideology. Its armies move along the same Nile corridor Egypt once mastered. What has changed is relative strength. While Egypt fractures, Kush consolidates. Where Egypt's authority diffuses outward, Kush's authority tightens inward. Royal power in Kush is centralized. Military command is unified. Religious ideology reinforces political legitimacy rather than competing with it. The Kushite state can mobilize manpower deliberately, not piecemeal. It can move forces along the Nile without negotiating passage through hostile jurisdictions. This contrast matters. Egypt's rulers still claim supremacy, but they lack enforcement. Kush does not yet claim Egypt, but it possesses the capacity to act decisively. The strategic vacuum created by Egypt's internal collapse is real, measurable, and visible to any neighboring power capable of exploiting it. The problem for Egypt is not simply weakness, it is disunity. No single Egyptian ruler can rally the entire country against an external threat. No unified command can coordinate defense from Delta to Thebes. No central authority can compel loyalty when local rulers calculate that accommodation may be safer than resistance. By the time Kush begins to move north, Egypt is already politically defeated. The military campaign that follows will make this visible, but it does not not create it. Egypt's crisis is structural, not temporary. It is the precondition that makes conquest possible. And into that fractured landscape steps a southern power that understands Egypt better than any outsider ever has. South of Egypt's fractured frontier, the political logic is very different. The kingdom of Kush is not improvising power in the 8th century BCE. It is exercising a system that has already matured. Its center of gravity lies at Napata, near the 4th cataract of the Nile, a location that is both defensible and connected to long-distance trade routes reaching deep into Africa. From there, Kush controls access to gold-bearing regions, pastoral hinterlands, and manpower reserves unavailable to the divided polities of northern Egypt. This economic base matters because it supports standing military capacity rather than emergency mobilization. Kushite armies are not seasonal militias raised only in moments of crisis. They are organized forces built around infantry formations, supported by archers and chariot units adapted to Nile Valley warfare. Nubian archery, in particular, has a long-established reputation in Egyptian sources, not as exotic skill, but as reliable battlefield effectiveness. Archers are trained, equipped, and deployed as part of coordinated formations, rather than independent skirmishers. What distinguishes Kush is not just weapons, but command. Military authority flows directly from the royal house. There is no parallel priestly command competing for loyalty. Religious ideology reinforces political obedience rather than fragmenting it. The king's authority is not symbolic. It is exercised through taxation, land control, and mobilization. When Kush moves forces, it does so under unified direction. Religion plays a central role in this cohesion. Kushite rulers position themselves as legitimate servants of Amun, the same god whose priesthood dominates Thebes. This is not superficial imitation. Kushite kings present themselves as restorers of divine order in Egypt, not foreign conquerors. That claim resonates because Egypt's own rulers have failed to embody it convincingly. Kush's ideology does not replace Egyptian tradition, it claims to fulfill it. This ideological alignment has practical military consequences. As Kush moves north, it does not confront an alien population resisting cultural absorption. It confronts elites already embedded in the same religious framework, many of whom are more concerned with preserving local power than defending a fragmented national state. Kush's campaign is therefore not fought solely through force. It is fought through legitimacy claims that undermine resistance before armies even clash. Logistically, Kush is well positioned. The Nile serves as a controlled supply corridor rather than a contested boundary. Kushite forces can move north along a river they already dominate politically and militarily. Unlike Rome in later centuries, Kush does not have to impose infrastructure on hostile territory to sustain operations. Its campaign routes follow existing networks of control and influence. There is also a long memory at work. Kushite elites are deeply familiar with Egyptian military practice, fortifications, and political behavior. Nubia has been occupied by Egypt before. Kush has learned from that experience rather than forgotten it. Egyptian-style fortresses, administrative practices, and religious symbols are not foreign to Kush. They are adapted and repurposed. This familiarity strips Egypt of a key advantage usually enjoyed by imperial cores. Kush does not misunderstand Egypt. It understands it too well. By the mid-8th century BCE, Kush is not reacting to Egyptian weakness opportunistically. It is acting from a position of confidence. Its leadership sees a divided north incapable of unified resistance, a shared religious system that can be leveraged for legitimacy, and a military force capable of sustained riverine campaigning. This is why Kush does not raid and withdraw. It prepares to conquer. The question is no longer whether Egypt is vulnerable. It is whether Egypt can stop a southern power that has the organization, ideology, and military capacity to replace fragmented rule with centralized authority. The answer will be decided not by influence or diplomacy, but by force, applied systematically, city by city, ruler by ruler. And at center of that decision stands a king who understands exactly what Egypt has become. The campaign does not begin as a rush for conquest. It begins as a test of authority. In the middle of the 8th century BCE, Kushite forces begin moving north along the Nile under the command of Piye, a ruler whose power rests as much on religious legitimacy as on military strength. Piye does not announce himself as an invader seeking plunder. He presents himself as a king responding to disorder, a restorer of divine balance in a land that has failed to govern itself. This framing matters because Egypt's political landscape is already primed to fracture under pressure. As Piye advances, he does not encounter a unified Egyptian defense. He encounters a patchwork of local rulers, each governing a city or region, each claiming kingship, each suspicious of the others. Some control fortified towns. Others command militias loyal to family or temple. None possess the authority to coordinate resistance along the length of the river. Piye exploits this systematically. The Kushite army moves north in stages, securing the river corridor rather than racing toward a single decisive battle. Strong points are isolated. Cities are encircled. Local rulers are confronted individually, not collectively. Where resistance is offered, Piye responds with force. Where submission is possible, he accepts it on strict terms. The primary account of this campaign survives in the Victory Stela of Piye, a long inscription set up at Napata after the campaign concludes. It is not a poetic myth. It is an operational record. Lists of cities, names of rulers, descriptions of sieges, oaths sworn, and penalties imposed. While the text reflects royal ideology, its detail is unusually concrete, allowing modern historians to reconstruct the sequence of events with relative confidence. One of the earliest major confrontations occurs at Hermopolis, where a local ruler attempts to resist Kushite authority. Piye does not bypass the city. He besieges it deliberately, cutting it off and forcing surrender. The pattern repeats elsewhere. Cities fall not through single dramatic assaults, but through pressure applied over time, control of access, intimidation of elites, and the demonstration that resistance will bring destruction without relief from neighboring rulers. Psychological warfare plays a central role. Piye presents himself as a pious king, offended by impiety and disorder. He condemns Egyptian rulers not only for rebellion, but for religious failure, neglecting temples, ignoring proper ritual, and violating the moral order associated with Amun. This rhetoric undermines their legitimacy in the eyes of their own priesthoods. In several cases, Egyptian rulers submit after religious authorities withdraw support rather than after military defeat alone. Where submission occurs, it is formalized. Rulers prostrate themselves before Pi. They swear oaths. They are allowed to retain local authority under Kushite supremacy. This approach avoids the need for garrisoning every city while still neutralizing opposition. It also reinforces Piye's claim that he is restoring order, not dismantling Egypt. Resistance collapses unevenly but decisively. The most powerful northern ruler, Tefnakht of the Western Delta, attempts to organize opposition but fails to coordinate effectively. Distance, mistrust, and fragmented loyalties undermine his efforts. When Kushite forces approach the delta, the momentum of the campaign is already clear. Cities defect rather than resist. Tefnakht ultimately submits without a final pitched battle. What is striking is what Piye does next. He does not remain in Egypt to govern directly. After securing oaths and recognition across the Nile Valley, he returns south to Kush. From a modern perspective, this seems counterintuitive. Why conquer Egypt and then leave? But within the political logic of the time, Piye has achieved his objective. He has established supremacy, enforced legitimacy, and bound Egypt's rulers to Kushite authority without the costs of permanent occupation. Egypt has been defeated not by annihilation, but by reordering. Every major power center now acknowledges Kushite overlordship. The campaign demonstrates that Egypt's internal divisions are irreconcilable under its existing rulers. Authority has shifted south. The old imperial flow has reversed. This is the moment of transfer. Egypt's internal divisions are irreconcilable under its existing rulers. Authority has shifted south. The old imperial flow has reversed. This is the moment of transfer. Egypt's resistance does not fail because Kush overwhelms it with numbers. It fails because it cannot act as a state. PA's campaign exposes that weakness city by city, oath by oath, until a credible alternative. The conquest is complete, not when the last wall falls, but when submission becomes the rational choice for every surviving ruler. From this point forward, Egypt is no longer deciding its own political future. Conquest alone does not make an empire. What follows determines whether victory lasts. After PA's campaign, authority in Egypt does not collapse into chaos or prolonged resistance. Instead, it reorganizes under Kushite rule with surprising speed. This is not because Egypt has suddenly become weak culturally or administratively, but because Kushite rulers understand exactly how Egyptian power is supposed to function, and they choose to operate inside that system rather than replace it. The result is the establishment of what modern historians call the 25th dynasty of Egypt, a line of Nubian kings who rule Egypt not as foreign occupiers, but as pharaohs in the full ideological and institutional sense. PA's successors, most notably Shabaka and later Taharqa, do not govern from temporary military camps or impose a parallel administration. They take up residence within Egypt's political geography. They restore Memphis as a royal center. They engage directly with Egyptian priesthoods. They adopt full pharaonic titulary, iconography, and ritual practice. This is deliberate policy, not assimilation by accident. The Kushite rulers present themselves as restorers of order after a long period of fragmentation. Their inscriptions emphasize Ma'at, cosmic balance, and frame their reigns as a return to proper kingship rather than the beginning of something new. In artistic and architectural programs, they consciously revive styles associated with Egypt's Old and Middle Kingdoms, periods remembered as eras of strong, centralized authority. This revival is not nostalgia. It is political messaging. By referencing earlier, idealized phases of Egyptian history, Kushite pharaohs position themselves as legitimate heirs to the entire tradition of Egyptian kingship, not as outsiders ruling by force. This matters because legitimacy in Egypt is not purely military. It is religious, historical, and symbolic. Kushite rulers meet all three criteria. Administratively, continuity is preserved. Egypt's existing bureaucracy, scribes, tax officials, provincial administrators, remains in place. Local elites who submitted during PA's campaign are confirmed in their positions under Kushite oversight. This minimizes disruption and reduces the need for coercive occupation. The state functions because the people who know how to run it are still running it. Temples receive renewed patronage. The priesthood of Amun, long a rival power under weakened Egyptian kings, becomes a key ally of Kushite rule. Massive building projects are undertaken at Karnak and elsewhere. Temple estates are restored. Ritual life is reinvigorated. In return, religious institutions reinforce the legitimacy of Nubian pharaohs as divinely sanctioned rulers of Egypt. Militarily, Kushite control is firm but not oppressive. Standing forces remain available to suppress rebellion, but the emphasis shifts to stability rather than constant campaigning. Egypt's internal conflicts diminish as rival dynasts lose the ability to claim kingship independently. The Nile Valley, fractured for decades, is once again governed under a single royal authority. Under Taharqa, this stability translates into renewed imperial ambition. Egypt projects power beyond its borders once more, intervening in the Levant and interacting directly with Near Eastern great powers. Monumental construction resumes on a scale not seen since the New Kingdom. Temples, statues, and inscriptions throughout Egypt and Nubia attest to a state that is confident, wealthy, and operational. What is most striking is that Kushite rule does not appear as an interlude to contemporaries. It appears as restoration. Egyptian material culture during this period does not show signs of occupation stress or collapse. Instead, it reflects consolidation and renewed investment. The Kushite pharaohs rule for decades, not years. Their authority is not constantly challenged internally. For a time, Egypt functions again as a coherent state. This phase matters because it overturns a common assumption about ancient conquest. Kush does not conquer Egypt and fail to govern it. It conquers Egypt and governs it effectively, using Egypt's own institutions, beliefs, and administrative practices. The success of the 25th dynasty lies not in erasing Egyptian identity, but in mastering it. For several generations, Nubian kings sit on the throne of the pharaohs, not as caretakers, not as temporary strongmen, but as rulers whose authority is accepted across the Nile Valley. The limits of this achievement will emerge later, under pressure from powers far beyond Egypt's southern frontier. But for now, Kush has done something rare in ancient history. It has conquered Egypt and made it work. The end of Kushite rule in Egypt does not come from internal collapse or loss of legitimacy. It comes from pressure applied far beyond the Nile Valley, by forces operating on a scale that even a reunited Egypt struggles to contain. By the early 7th century BCE, the geopolitical center of gravity in the Near East has shifted decisively. The Neo-Assyrian Empire is expanding westward and southward with unprecedented military capacity. Its armies are large, professional, and experienced in siege warfare. Its kings pursue domination not through influence alone, but through systematic destruction of rival power bases. Egypt, regardless of who rules it, lies directly in the path of this expansion. Under Taharqa, Egypt attempts to reassert influence in the Levant, supporting local rulers opposed to Assyrian control. From an Egyptian perspective, this is a return to traditional imperial policy. From an Assyrian perspective, it is unacceptable interference. The result is a series of confrontations that Egypt cannot localize or contain. Assyrian campaigns into the Levant escalate rapidly. Egyptian-backed forces are defeated. Assyrian armies push south, crossing into the Nile Delta itself. Unlike the fragmented rulers Pai once faced, the Assyrians operate with unified command, advanced siege techniques, and logistical systems designed for long-distance campaigning. The Kushite pharaohs are forced to divide attention between defending Egypt's northern approaches and maintaining authority over a long, river-based empire. This strain exposes a structural limit. Kushite power is deep along the Nile, but it is elongated. Holding Egypt requires defending multiple fronts simultaneously: north against Assyria, south against potential unrest, and internally against collaborators willing to align with the new dominant power. Even with capable leadership, this becomes increasingly difficult. Assyrian victories in Egypt are not permanent occupations. They are punitive, destabilizing strikes designed to break resistance and install compliant rulers. Cities are taken and sacked. Egyptian elites are captured or replaced. Local leaders begin recalculating loyalties. Kushite authority is challenged not because it fails administratively, but because the cost of holding Egypt under constant Assyrian pressure becomes unsustainable. Eventually, Kushite rulers withdraw southward, abandoning Egypt rather than fighting a war of annihilation far from their core base. This withdrawal does not end Kushite civilization. It marks a strategic contraction, not a collapse. The kingdom continues to exist and thrive in Nubia for centuries afterward, adapting to new regional realities. Egypt, meanwhile, does not return to its previous state of independence. It passes through periods of Assyrian dominance, local collaboration, and further foreign rule. The Kushite period stands out precisely because it represents the last time Egypt is ruled by a power rising from within Africa itself, rather than imposed from the Near East or Mediterranean world. Archaeological and inscriptional evidence confirms this sequence clearly. Kushite building projects do not abruptly cease due to internal decay. They end as political focus shifts south. Egyptian administrative continuity breaks not during Kushite rule, but under Assyrian intervention. Nubian material culture remains robust in its homeland, reinforcing that the loss of Egypt is geopolitical, not civilizational. The historical significance of the Kushite conquest lies in its direction. For centuries, power had flowed south along the Nile, from Egypt into Nubia. In the 8th century BCE, that flow reverses completely. A Nubian army defeats Egyptian rulers, installs Nubian kings as pharaohs, reunifies the Nile Valley, and governs Egypt as a functioning empire for multiple generations. This is not a symbolic episode. It is one of the clearest, best documented cases in ancient history where an African state conquers and rules one of the world's most powerful civilizations on its own terms. The Kushite pharaohs do not erase Egypt. They stabilize it when Egypt cannot stabilize itself. They revive institutions, restore religious authority, and project power outward until confronted by forces operating at an entirely different scale. That distinction matters. Kush does not lose Egypt because it was incapable of ruling it. It loses Egypt because the geopolitical environment changes dramatically. When faced with the full weight of Assyrian imperial warfare, even a restored Egyptian state struggles to survive. What remains is a permanent alteration of historical memory. The conquest of Egypt by Kush is not an anomaly or footnote. It is a reminder that African states were not merely shaped by ancient empires. They shaped them in return. For a century, the Nile Valley is ruled from the south. Egyptian kingship is redefined by Nubian hands. And the idea that power in the ancient world flowed in only one direction is decisively disproven. Egypt is conquered. Egypt is ruled. And history records exactly who did it.